Welcome to the Backlash at Backlash.com. My name is Rod Van Mecklin, and in this video I'm going to read from my 1991 article, Rights. The full article is linked below. I wrote this in 1991 when I still naively hoped that we could put an end to the cycle of sexism. But to paraphrase Martin Armstrong, cycles exist because of human nature. All we can do is understand, observe, survive, and sometimes profit from them. Speaking of Martin Armstrong, I want to encourage everybody to visit his blog. Do it today. I'm recording this on September 19th, 2015. For several years, Armstrong's model has been forecasting that a huge phase transition would begin on October 1st, 2015. That's just a couple of weeks away. In his most recent video, The Establishment's Narrative is Collapsing, linked below, Roosh talks about this. He's right. Dozens of others, including me, have been talking about, writing about, and making videos about this for months, and in some cases years. Armstrong being the most prominent in specifically forecasting October 1st. He says this will be a phase transition that will affect everything but primarily the bond markets and government. He does say, however, that the economic turmoil we see elsewhere will come to the West, including the United States and Canada. Forewarned is forearmed. If you have not already prepared, do so now. Back to the article. As I read through and updated the formatting, I was embarrassed by some of the views, as I had not yet fully reconciled the realization that feminism had become a hate movement in 1991. So there are elements of this article that I no longer agree with, but there's historical information that some may find interesting. 1992, Bellevue, Washington. In 1963, the feminine mystique changed forever our perception of gender roles and women's rights. We read about the alleged silent suffering of the cloistered urban concubines, and their long march to adult autonomy began anew, as women everywhere demanded rights equal to and the same as men's. I want to pause here for a moment to note that while some even today talk about this as if women's historical role has been that of a housewife, it's simply not true. Aristocratic women were housewives in a sense, but all other classes of women worked. Some worked in the homes of the aristocrats, others worked in the fields. In traditional societies, women and men did not do the same work, but work they did. With the advent of industrialization in England, women worked in scullery positions and even in factories. It was not until industrialization and, in the United States and Canada, urbanization had lifted the standard of living high enough that women began to live as housewives. So there is simply no reason to view housewifery as the original role of women. Being libertarian, I prefer to leave such things to individual choices. Most people, I suspect, would gravitate toward such a division of gender roles, but there is no reason why we cannot accommodate the outliers by making this a matter of individual choice. Continuing. In the years since, however, there has been the sound of another silence whispering within, the sound of withering masculinity. But we were too busy listening to the ladies' laments to hear the murmuring discontent of men suffering from another problem with no name. We would do well, however, to heed Catherine McKinnon when she wrote that, quote, "The unnamed should not be mistaken for the non-existent. Silence often speaks of pain and degradation so thorough that the situation cannot be conceived as any other than it is," close quote. In the early 1970s, George Gilder, a tradcon, wrote about this. He wrote 2 books addressing the issue of men's rights, sexual suicide, and Naked Nomads, Unmarried Men in America. Few copies were sold, men didn't listen to him, and women were just too busy listening to their own feminist pundits. A few years later, Roy Schenck, a socialist, wrote The Other Side of the Coin, Causes and Consequences of Men's Oppression. Again, few copies were sold, men didn't listen to him, and women were just too busy listening to their own pundits. And why not? Men already had all the rights, so why bother? But, like the problem with no name Betty Friedan called the feminine mystique, today we call it clinical depression, men had problems with no name too, and they suffered, mostly in silence. A silence that would persist until men learned how to listen, We had to learn how to listen to ourselves, and we had to learn how to listen to each other or perish. For this and many other reasons, the mythopoetic men's movement was briefly necessary. It taught men to listen to men. Listen they did. What did they hear? There are men crying out for their children, men doomed to a life of solitary servitude to laws that define fatherhood only in terms of fertilization and financial support. Can you hear them? There are men weeping for wives in a world where a simple compliment may lead to charges of sexual harassment. Can you hear them? We must hear them, and we're learning how to listen, yet for this we are under attack, and by we I meant men. A few years ago, 2 female psychiatrists proposed adding masculinity to the list of emotional disorders. What sexism! It's incredible that they were ever taken seriously, or still are. More recently, June Stevenson, the second-wave feminist author of a book titled Men Are Not Cost-Effective, Male Crime in America, proposed a special testosterone tax, taxing men for being male because men commit most of the violence. Correction. Men commit most of the reported violence. In the United States and Canada, misandrists are working hard to make it easy to convict men of rape if they have sex with women who are under the influence of alcohol, women who experience postcoital regret, or with women who are reluctant to have sex in the first place. Let's look at this. If a woman can get a rape conviction on the grounds that she had sex while she was drunk, then why can't a man do the same thing? Cher Haidt says it's because women suffer greater social costs than men do. Whatever happened to the idea of equal rights? Years ago, when I was in college, my buddies used to speak of a secret fear. The fear that they would go to a bar one Friday night, get drunk, then wake up the next morning in the arms of some female equivalent of a dirty old man. I had friends this happened to, and they felt pretty bad about it, like these women had taken advantage of them. Were they raped? No. College boys can't be raped because only women will be protected by law. Whatever happened to the idea of equal rights? According to Time magazine, the feminist professors and students working to establish a statistical basis for the idea of reluctant sex as rape found that more of the men surveyed than women said they had had sex when they really didn't want to. Everybody ignored that. Do women have all the rights they should? I don't know. Probably not, but men don't either. By the time most fathers have time to spend with their children, their kids are gone out the door. By the time most men truly appreciate their wives as more than mere sex objects and housekeepers, they're divorced. By the time they realize there's more to life than career success, they're dead. These have been the limitations upon men a long time. There are biological reasons why, survival imperatives that had to be satisfied, but society at that time helped. Grandparents, elderly relatives, the community cared for the kids, rituals brought and bound parents and their children together in ceremonies, some sacred, some just for fun, and customs instructed our behaviors. Not anymore. Most of our institutions are gone, stripped away by our own explosive and somewhat self-directed evolution, or by the egregious intentions of the misandristic feminist political activists. Now we must reinstate those institutions, develop new ones, or self-destruct. Note, I think this is one of the areas where MGTOW, neo-masculinists, and tradcons can agree. Continuing. For promising some remedies to this sad state of affairs, the mythopoetic men's movement came under attack. This reminds me of something Robert Heinlein once wrote: shoot pacifists and anarchists on sight, but beware anarchists. They shoot back. Evidently, feminists equate the mythopoetic men's movement to pacifism and believe they can attack it with impunity. Unfortunately, that proved to be true. They don't realize, as perhaps many have not yet realized, the profoundly fundamental connection between the men's rights and the mythopoetic. I was writing there to the mythopoetic men's movement because they were sneering at the men's rights activists and thought that they didn't need them, that we were unnecessary. Of course, MGTOW and neo-masculinists and the men's rights activists are all anti-feminists also, are all kind of sneering at one another and saying, oh, we don't need you. Men, whether they are involved in the rights movement or the mythopoetic movement, or MGTOW or anti-feminism or neo-masculinity, have a shared goal, creating safe spaces wherein we may work to preserve, protect, and continue the evolution of appropriate, needed institutions that, together with the women's movement, yes, I cringed when I read that, will lead us all to a finer state of being. The women's movement part, I mean. Back then I thought we could reconcile. Now I see no means, no basis for reconciling. Consequently, every man who is involved in the mythopoetic men's movement has a vested interest in the men's rights movement. Note, while I have heard some videos in which men today have rediscovered the Jungian archetypes and they're real excited about it, the mythopoetic movement was based primarily on Jungian archetypes, and frankly it proved to be a dead end. Why? Maybe too many of us felt that it was too touchy-feely. Or maybe it was because their movement got overtaken by toxic narcissistic personalities, which is always a risk. Regardless, for those of you who want to pursue it, rather than reinventing the wheel, you might want to delve into the works of Robert Bly and Joseph Campbell. Just keep in mind about Campbell that his analyses take too much out of context to build conclusions that might make some kind of sense today, but would have made no sense if put back into their original contexts. Continuing. Do you want equal opportunity to have and raise your children? Shared custody is a men's rights issue. Today, I would also add that no-fault divorce is a men's rights issue. Where abortion is a consideration, do men have as much interest in the final decision as women? This is a men's rights issue. Do you suspect husband battering may be a bigger issue than feminists and the media would have you believe? That too is a men's rights issue. According to extensive surveys, most American women will have, do have, or have had children. Many men never will. Reproductive inequality is a men's rights issue. Okay, I'm going to cut it off there. 2015, Olympia, Washington. What can men do? First, I want to mention some authors you may want to read so you can avoid reinventing the wheel. In addition to Joseph Campbell and Robert Bly, other historically significant authors include Sam Keene, Warren Farrell, especially Warren Farrell, Mick Hunter, that's Mick M-I-C Hunter, George Gilder, Aaron Kipnis, and Roy Schenck. Of course, Christina Hoff Sommers, and although Cathie Jung is known mostly for being a columnist, she actually wrote a very good book on men's rights and feminism. I don't recall the name of the book, but, Cathie was born in Russia. Her name when she was born was Ekaterina Jung. Ekaterina Jung, yes. And I like to joke that her book on men's issues and feminism was kind of like a Russian novel. Long and heavy on the details, lots and lots of footnotes. Very good book. For humorous perspective, you might also want to check out Iron Joe Bob by Joe Bob Briggs. It's kind of funny. Next, I'm a big fan of Eleanor Roosevelt's assertion that, quote, great minds discuss ideas, average minds discuss events, small minds discuss people, close quote. Since there's no way to avoid talking about people and events, I'm sure that what she meant was that small minds gossip and backbite. From the earliest days of the men's rights movement, MRAs, anti-feminists, and now today, MGTOW spend time slinging mud at one another. Now, I'm not pointing fingers. I have done this myself, nor do I put opposing feminists into this category. Feminism has turned into a hate movement, and we should criticize the hate mongers every chance we get. But I most enjoy listening to the videos and reading the articles that focus on ideas. Got an idea? Put it out there. Think the idea is stupid? Explain why. We can rip ideas to shreds without attacking one another. Argumentation, as Turd Flinging Monkey mentioned in one of his recent videos, is something men do. I'll wrap this up by returning to the concluding paragraphs of my article on rights. Ultimately, this is important. Ultimately, this is not about your sex, but about your humanity and your rights as a human being. The rights everybody, regardless of gender, should expect and deserves. Our silence is ended. Rights are for people, and we can afford to be silent no longer. Now that we've learned to listen, it's time for us to be heard and to tell the world that men's rights can no longer be ignored because men are people too. That's all for now. Check out the other videos, subscribe to the channel. For the Backlash at Backlash.com, my name is Rod Van Mechelen.